Oh, well, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, Chewy.
Morning.
Morning, how are you, mate?
Yeah, not too bad.
How's the dog going? We all right?
At the moment. Oh, well, she was on the chair. Now she's gone.
Mm-hmm. You should get a dog cam, a puppy cam. If you get a puppy cam, you can do this. You see, you can do things like this and go, look, see?
Aw, sleepy weepy.
Hello. What you doing? Nah, hi, mate.
No.
No.
Not bothered.
So you need to get yourself a puppy cam, and then you can, or dog cam, and then they can just chill. And then they're on camera, and then you have to go, shh, you're on camera. And it works. They understand that. You doing well?
Yeah, not too bad at all.
Much going on in your world? The dog walker's about. You got a dog walker, eh? I think that's
yeah. She comes in twice a week to take Ilva around forestry tracks and stuff like that. She comes back very muddy, very tired.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, it's just nice to get like a whole bunch of dogs together. There's a couple of other Valhans like her.
I typically take mine to a park once a day, sometimes more actually. And I have one of those plastic throwy sticks and a ball.
Oh yeah,
because she's a border collie, so running is her thing, and she just goes and goes and goes. I normally break before she does. I'm like, oh, she's shoulders getting a bit sore. I might have a break now. That's what we're doing. Just exercise her, and that's a bit of fun. And then I mean, I don't know. Didn't know we're going to talk about this today, but we have interact. She's quite well trained. I have to say, I never trust a dog entirely. I read something the other day from a dog trainer who said there's only two kinds of dogs that don't bite: ones that have muzzles on and ones that have no teeth. So, like, I kind of think about that attitude when it comes to dogs. It's like it's that old, the horse will always kick and the gun's always loaded kind of philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I'm always really careful with her, but which is when I say she's pretty well trained, I say pretty well trained. We will see. But I'm getting a bit sick and tired of going to parks with people who can't control their fucking dogs. That's for sure. Sprinting from one side of the park to the other, 200 meters away, and having the owner run behind, going, "Sorry." I had an interaction with one the other day, and I just said, if you can't control your dog, that's cool, but just put it on the lead. I said, or go a kilometer down the road. There's actually a dog park there, and your dog can go mad with all the other dogs if you want it to. But if you can't control your dog, if you don't have recall, then just keep your dog on a lead. And they got really fucking grumpy.
We put a lot of time into making sure that Ilva was socialized because she's a herding dog.
Yeah.
So we initially had a bit of trouble with kids running around the park, and she'd just go, "Oh, cool, chase." And then the kids start screaming and that sort of thing. And she like knows them.
Yeah.
Or she'd just go for the heels. And it was like, it was never malicious. It was just hard-coded behavior.
Yeah.
But yeah, she'll even do that to us if she's tired. Like when we get up in the morning to feed her, she's like, no, come on, this way. Where's my food?
Yeah. No, I mean, border collies, but the same. And the thing that happened the other day at the park is this dog, and it was a puppy, but it's like, there's another reason to have it on a lead. It's a puppy. Ran over a rugby field to a second rugby field. So it's over 100 meters away because they saw this dog. And then my dog's a bit of a nervous little thing. And she's okay with dogs. She likes dogs. She likes playing, but she likes to be really comfortable. They reckon border collies on some level are a bit more skitterish because they're smart and they actually know. So they're like, hey, what the fuck? This is not normal. What's going on? Whereas a big dumb Labrador just comes, bounding in sort of thing. But smarter dogs tend to be, and she's a bit skitterish. And so this dog comes running up to her and she's like, okay, what's going on here? She's checking it out. They're doing the sniffy thing. And then the other dog, who's just a puppy, nothing to do with the dog, starts going. And mine wasn't into it. So mine was like, and because she's a border collie, and border collies, when they're herding sheep, they sometimes grab them by the face. That's what's in their DNA to move them. And so she started doing this kind of nipping. And I'm just like, dude, the problem is if you don't control your dog to the other guy, I'm like, what happened is your dog will come running to my dog to play. Understandable. It's a dog. But then my dog may not like or be ready for it. My dog might get nippy, and then your dog bites my dog. And because your dog because you don't have control of your dog, I've now got a fucking vet bill. So that's why if you don't have recall, Yeah, if you don't have recall, if you can't keep your dog beside you, then it needs to be on a lead in public. It's as simple as that. Or go to a dog park and let it go bananas. That's what they're for. Yep. Anyway, there you go. There's the introduction to our show today. Control your fucking dogs. Oh, look at this. There we go. Someone's already in on this one. Maybe we should just do a conversation about dogs. How do you say that? Modots. Mohadots. Totally agree with that. Those people who don't realize that their out of control dog could be entering the space of a dog who is reactive and could hurt them. Yeah, but also vice versa. Like I said, with my one, but the other thing is she's fucking quick as grease lightning, so she'll get away from any other dog in the world. But it's like at some point, if she doesn't want, like I've got my dog under control, and I know because my dog acts in a certain way, and if my dog freaks out because yours is chasing it, and my dog and it nips at you, and then your dog bites mine as a reaction, then what? It's like control your dog. I mean, it all comes down to just control your dog. There you go. She's still sleeping.
The worst one mine's done is it took out a 5-year-old at the knees at the park, just running behind him. She's a small dog, but she's a tanky wee thing. So yeah, that was a bit of apologizing and sorry.
Yeah, it's that one where they are over 100 meters away and their dog just bolts. And I'm like, if you've got a dog that won't stay with you, then have it on a lead. It's pretty simple. And the thing that I hate most of all is when people go, oh, it's just dogs. Like the dude said to me the other day, oh, I'm sorry, but she's a puppy. And I'm like that's a reason to not have control of your dog. It's like, well, it's like, if your 3-year-old kid smacks another 3-year-old kid in the face, it's like going, well, they're just kids. But like, hang on, do you know that those people who go, well, it's boys being boys or whatever? It's the same people that go, well, they're just puppies. They're just dogs. Like, no, you can control. You can't control. That's why there's not bad dogs. It's just bad people, bad owners.
Absolutely.
He says it in an incredibly judgmental and nasty way. Hey, let's talk. Let's talk about stuff. Let's talk about things that are going on. We could just keep talking about dogs. There are people obviously want to join in on that already because that seems to be the big topic of the day. There is news coming out yesterday, breaking news, actually. I think it was last night. Certainly late yesterday afternoon, that MIQ, and for those people who are outside of New Zealand watching this, maybe there's some people tuned in today because of my MIQ podcast this morning. MIQ is it's quarantine. Actually, I don't even know what it stands for. Something quarantine, mandatory installed quarantine. I don't know.
I'm just realizing I don't know what it is.
Yeah. You should Google that. Google MIQ while I'm talking. So you come into the country for 2 weeks, you quarantine because of COVID. The government received some advice from their health advisors last November that I reckon is mandatory something quarantine. That's what I reckon it is. That they could have stopped quarantine,
isolation, and quarantine.
Oh, yeah, managed isolation. Yeah, mandatory would be a bit too authoritarian, wouldn't it? They got advice last November that quarantine, the MIQ could cease, and they chose not to take that advice and keep quarantine in place for longer. It is finished now, isn't it? I'm pretty sure it's finished now. Yeah, okay, it's finished now. It is. But it stayed in for a few months longer, and this broke last night. And this is Jenna Lynch, who is the political, I think, editor from News Hub, and she's at Parliament, and she kind of broke the story like this.
Well, the short answer is the Ministry of Health didn't want it out there. It tried to keep it secret, refusing to release it under the Official Information Act until its hand was forced by the Ombudsman. This memo, dated the 12th of November last year, is written by Dr. Carolyn McElnay, Dr. Bloomfield's offsider, and expressly states that the risk of international arrivals transmitting COVID-19 was no longer greater than the risk of domestic transmission. Translation, the risk at the border was no longer greater than the risk of spread in Auckland. But the extra is that given the context of the Delta outbreak at the time, the fact that there was ongoing transmission in Auckland and jumping across its border, the fact that we had 80% of us double vaccinated and we had a vaccine requirement in place for travellers, health officials agreed back then that MIQ was no longer justified on a public health basis, but still it remained in place over Christmas. Now, obviously, after that, the Omicron wave changed.
We'll come back to this, but don't you like that throwaway bit? You know, I mean, they made a decision, and I mean, we know that after that, the decision was the right decision. After that, after that, the decision, because Omicron was probably the right one, but at the time, they made the wrong decision.
Difficult to hear for the thousands of Kiwis that battled a cruel lottery just to try and see their families for Christmas.
Now, look, I think that's a fair point. I mean, that point about the whole thing seems pretty fair to me. Is that, you know, there was a lot of there was a lot of issues around Christmas and people wanting to come home, and I know that that's a bit of a luxury for some, but I think it's fair to at least put that out there as if they could have changed their decision. Hindsight being 2020, because Omicron wasn't here. It's probably good that they didn't, but you can at least mount an argument that, you know, dudes weren't very kind to people coming home for Christmas. Joey,
I understand people's frustrations. People, you know, I like my wife's family is in the UK and in Australia. She hasn't been able to go and see them for ages. She wouldn't have been able to go over. Well, she would have been able to go over to Australia and not come back without MIQ. But it's so emotive. You know, oh, that's cruel. It's torturous. It's this unfair lottery and that sort of thing. We were at that stage managing a major outbreak in Auckland.
Delta. Yeah.
Why would you want to add more stress into that situation? You know, the guys in Auckland that were effectively on a harder lockdown than the rest of the country for almost 2 months, I'm sure that they weren't in a hurry to introduce more vectors for infection and that sort of thing. And I think that a more cautious approach to wrapping up MIQ, because once you wrap it up, you know, okay, no more MIQ. The hotels can go back to doing whatever they want to do. You can't go, oh shit, that's a mistake. No, we need it again.
Yeah.
You know,
let's just add on what Carl's just said as well. Carl's just put in there that it's not quite true about what's just been said. The memo is out in the public sphere. They recommended doing some further policy work for policy advice for an early 2022 wind down, and then of course, as Carl says, they then backtracked that on a bit because of Omicron. So Carl's added some in there, and as we do, because we are live streaming, you're welcome to add in as I burp. Hang on. There you go. That's just perfect. Yeah, and I don't know, it's we'll keep going, right, because there's some other things we want to add to it, because today of course the opposition is making as much of this as they humanly and possibly can. So a clip here which is from this morning's AM show, asking Ryan Bridge is asking Christopher Luxon, they're making the point in like kind of this roundabout way. Oh, well, that means you probably were right, weren't you? Weren't you right? Weren't you right when you came out criticizing that shit? So that's sort of the setup to this question, and this is what Mr. Luxon had to say.
Well, look, I just think, you know, there's obviously a lack of openness and transparency, and it's a government that said that they'd be very transparent about it. I think the other challenge was then it just hung around forever, even if it was another 3.5 months after this that we still had it. And it was very obvious that we actually had even Omicron then in the community, actually not at the border. And it took too long for it to be wound down, if you remember. And every week made a difference. Every day made a difference to people wanting to come home and see loved ones in tough situations.
We've all had the letters, haven't we, from people in MIQ
Yep.
and wanting to get into New Zealand who couldn't. So what if he comes on here and says, oh, well, we had Omicron, so lucky we didn't?
Yeah, well, look, I think at the time of this article, you know, when this advice came out, Omicron wasn't actually even in Australia at that point in time.
Well, it didn't even exist.
And there probably was an argument to say, well, actually, until we get clear on what Omicron actually is, if you remember what it was like in the moment of being unsure about what was coming. But the reality was, even very quickly after that, you know, the reality was that the threat was actually in the community, not at the border.
So that was the points that they wanted to make. They're sort of, obviously, you would expect an opposition MP, doesn't matter who it is, to be making a big deal out of it. I do think, and I think this is a really important point to be aware of, the same people who are pearl clutching right now, basically saying the government didn't follow the scientific advice, are the same people who for the last 6 months have been pearl clutching when the government has been following the scientific advice. For example, The Prime Minister was very clear as to why Auckland stayed in red for a little bit longer, because the curve wasn't at where it was supposed to be at. At that point, many of these same commentators were saying this is ridiculous. Auckland should be at orange, yada, yada, yada. But the reason that that decision was made, so in that instance, they wanted the government not to follow the science. Now, if this is an instance of the government not following the science, they're still critical. It's almost like they just want to be critical of the government for critical sake. Almost. I mean, we may not be able to go all the way there, but it's almost like they're just looking for a reason to criticize the government no matter what they do, as strange as that may sound, Chewy.
Well, I've just pulled up something here. Someone who's been obviously critical of the government all the way through. National Party's COVID-19 spokesman, Chris Bishop. What he said at the time, that the government made the right call on boosters, the delay in reopening was necessary. National had previously been pushing for MIQ to be abolished, but the pushback of the partial opening of the border to Kiwis in Australia till the end of February is disappointing and will cause frustration, but we acknowledge the difficult circumstances presented by Omicron and the short delay in ending MIQ to allow as many people to be boosted as possible. But we should not underestimate the suffering this will cause for Kiwis overshore. I really hate the use of the word suffering, but if you take that out, that sounds a reasonably measured criticism.
I wonder if it was also
but
that
now
point.
that time is gone. We're going
Right
into
it's safe. Like we talked about yesterday. It's now safe. Oh no, it wasn't yesterday. Sorry, I'm getting confused with my podcast I did this morning. It's now safe to criticize the direction of the government. We all remember Simon Bridges when he chose to criticize the direction of the government way too early, and it basically cost him his political career. When he mentioned on his Facebook page about how badly the government was doing about 3 weeks into the original pandemic. And that was pretty much the reason his leadership ended, because it wasn't safe at that point to criticize. Now that there's a little bit more discontent, people are getting a bit tired about it. People have more opinions on what we should be doing. It's safe now for a opposition politician to come out, and disagree with the government. And I think the reason it wasn't safe back then, and why it ended up, other than that point with Simon Bridges, that the government and the opposition kind of spoke as one voice. Other than, I mean, there was some disagreements over opening the border or not, but it was because in that instance, in that moment, the government was right. Now, I'll say again, we talked about this yesterday, I think. I don't think the government's right now. So this is not a party political broadcast here about yay government. We learned yesterday that for us to be sort of at a safe level of Omicron transmission, we need to be at about 1,000 cases a day per million people. That's 5,000 people. Here in the deep south, where there's 300,000 people in the DHB, yesterday we had 988 cases, right? That's the equivalent of 3,500 per million, not 1,000. So we in the deep south are more than 300% above what we should be to be a safe level, yet the government's moved to orange. I think that's a terrible decision, and I will happily and openly criticize the government for that decision. The South, Christchurch, Canterbury, and the Southern HB should still be in red because of that. But that decision was made prior to Easter, I believe, because of a lot of outside pressure, and it was more of a populist politicking decision. They didn't follow good health measures. And guess what? Those same commentators applauded them that time, almost as if there's an agenda from the commentators, almost.
I'm always wary when a decision seems to be hanging on a particular seasonal event. We've got to have a decision by Christmas. We've got to have a decision by Easter. That sort of thing. I mean, that seems to be an external pressure to me that's irrelevant. Yes, people want to meet up for Christmas, but we're in the middle of this event that makes that a little bit harder, and maybe people are just going to have to deal. I know that there's a lot of tough circumstances in there around there with sick relatives or elderly relatives, that sort of thing. That's never going to change. There's always going to be situations like that. But yeah, when you're balancing up everything, I don't think a seasonal holiday really comes into it.
The conversation this morning did have an interesting sort of a ripple in it as well, and I want to play it. One of the criticisms that the National Party is making of Labour at the moment is they're not being as transparent as they said they were going to be. Now, when Ryan Bridge, it feels like, and I might be being unfair, threw a bit of a softball question at Christopher Luxon, which is basically going, well, you guys would be transparent, wouldn't you? You'd release all this information, wouldn't you? I think you'll see the response from Mr. Luxon is a bit slippery. So he's criticizing Labour for not being transparent enough. And when he gets asked a very gentle question about how transparent National would be, he doesn't really answer it. So have a listen to this.
Do you think, or if you were in government, would you release that information to the public?
Well, look, I think you really wanted to build the case so there was high trust with the government.
So you would have released these documents?
I'd like to think that we'd talk very openly about it, where the situation was and actually helping New Zealand on that journey and explain to them what was actually happening.
So you would
why that action was there.
You would proactively release memos like this as they came out, so that when you were making decisions, people could see why.
Yeah, I think you have to take people with you in a decision like that. I mean, it's really important.
Okay,
it was very confusing to New Zealanders as to why MIQ was there. We all had family members that were struggling to get home for different reasons. The justification or logic wasn't clearly understood.
Okay, well,
I think you have
the
to
best
take people
part
with you
about
in a
this
decision like that.
was
really important.
Okay,
it was very confusing.
Was
what was actually the New Zealand
when
we'd talk very build the case.
Ryan
that information to the public?
actually then told him what he should be doing.
So there was trust with the government.
So you would have released
not this question.
documents?
It's the next one that Ryan speaks. Have a listen
about it, where the situation was, and actually take the New Zealand people on that journey and explain to them what was actually happening.
So in other words, Christopher Luxon hasn't really answered the question yet. And then Ryan Bridge answers the question on his behalf. You ready? So this is Ryan Bridge answering his own question that he's just asked of the leader of the opposition.
So you would
you
would proactively release memos like this as they came out, so that when you were making decisions, people could see why.
Yeah, I think you have to take people with.
So I found that kind of amusing, because it's the classic politicking. And again, I say opposition. Yes, National are in opposition. Labour would be doing the same thing if they were sitting there in front of a John Campbell or whatever. But you know, it's like when Mr. Luxon said the other day, $50 a week too much in rent. How much are you going to reduce it by? Oh, we couldn't say. I don't know. Can't say that. But they're happy to say not transparent enough, non-transparent enough. Gets an opportunity to say you'd be this transparent, and don't go, yes, we would be, which is the only appropriate answer unless you're just playing politics.
So he's painted himself into a corner. I've been following all of these media appearances that Luxon seems to have been doing lately, and it just comes off that he's wildly inexperienced at this. You know, I think he said a couple of days ago that he has a habit of shooting from the lip. You can't do that as leader of the opposition. But yeah, he's definitely channeling John Key. But I think for all of John Key's faults, he never painted himself into that sort of corner.
Not a criticism in the slightest, but I'm always freaked out how much he even sounds like John Key. Like, just observationally, if you listen to the way he speaks, like I'm not even talking about it's a learned thing. It's like his actual timbre and his actual tone, and literally the noises that come out of his cake hole sound like if you closed your eyes, maybe we should do this one day and just play the audio from the two of them. I reckon it would be hard to tell them apart sometimes. Really similar.
He's even got John Key's little, I guess, for lack of a better word, vocal tics. How he leads into sentences, and I'll look. You know, I think everybody, you know, at the end of the day, all of those little sort of things are there for him. It is quite eerie.
I wanted to have a look as well as how this has been covered, this particular story. And so what I've done is I've brought up and it's what I'm doing now is a bit unfair. And I'm aware of that, because just because I'm going to show you a couple of websites doesn't mean that this is the only coverage that these media outlets have been giving it, because they could be much more than that. But I mean, this is not the News Hub website, but it is their YouTube channel, which I visit, and I'm on there every day looking for stories to talk about. And you can see from this morning's show, 3 of the clips are relating to this particular story. Mr. Luxon, Charlotte Ballast reminding everyone how terrible the government is with their MIQ, and then the minister as well talking about it. And of course, he was grilled, according to the headline. And then One News, who have a terrible Facebook page, YouTube page. So I didn't bother going there. They don't update it at all. But if you have a look on this, it's hardly there. There's one story about it over here. And if you click on this story, this is actually not a TVNZ story. It's an RNZ story. And I just thought, look, let's be fair. People often criticize TVNZ for being a supporter of Labor and state-run media when the state is being run by Labor. And I do think it's interesting that they've basically got nothing on their front page whatsoever about it. And News Hub's, at least their YouTube channel, has 3. What about actual News Hub? Hang on, let me go to News Hub, newshub.co.nz, see what's on their actual. Because that's your shop front, right? This is your shop front for your show. Look, so it's got it there and it's got it there. So there's a couple on their shop front and there's 3 stories. So I mean, again, maybe Breakfast covered it hugely today and they just haven't got the clips up yet. So it is being unfair. But if you look at the shop front, you kind of go, well, they haven't really talked about it at all. Whereas News Hub has talked about it a lot.
Yeah, and I think at a level that you would kind of think, I mean, would you class this as a major political scandal?
I don't think it's a major political stand. I think it's an interesting story. I think it's a fair story to be covering for sure. I looked at the News Talk ZB website as well, which many would say is a kind of right-leaning. Certainly commentators on there. I think they had it was their main headline, but there was only one story which seemed appropriate. And I think RNZ had a couple of stories on their front page. So it's obviously a story worth covering. It feels like the government gets advice, then makes a decision. And I always like to say the government because it's the same today as it might be in 18 months if National's leading. In many instances, they follow the advice. In other instances, they don't for their reasons. It seems that at the moment, as I have said a couple of times, people are jumping up and down because they didn't follow the advice they were given. But that's what they do. They get the advice and they go, this is the decision we're making. So it doesn't seem like a huge scandal to me. It seems like some in the media and certainly the opposition, as they should do probably, are making a bigger deal out of something that's not quite so big. That's what it feels like.
I guess another issue that I have when something, I'm just looking at RNZ's page at the moment, we need to get someone's comment on this. Obviously, we've gone to the minister and we've gone to the opposition. Who's next? Well, the next easiest people to grab are people that have been really heavily affected by, say, the MIQ lottery. A man who failed 6 times to get a spot in MIQ told RNZ he wanted compensation for those who could have skipped MIQ if the advice had been followed, as well as a meaningful apology. Now, when you reach out to those guys, you're going to get some just real OTT commentary. Just in my work, I've spoken to a lot of people that have gone through the MIQ process. There's hundreds of thousands of people that have gone through it.
Yeah.
And no one's saying that it was an easy process, but it was certainly a necessary one.
So what you're asking are those complaints representative or are they outliers? And I think most of us would be aware that they're outliers. So, but then again, that's what much in the media do. They take the 1 or 2 or 3% on either end of the stories, which are the absolute best, or the absolute worst, and actually mostly the worst, because if it bleeds, it leads. And that's what I remember someone once saying when we used to have like 2 channels in New Zealand. And they would talk about, it might have even been Hawkesby. They would talk about they should finish every news bulletin by saying, and that was how 17 people lived in New Zealand today. The rest of us had quite a good day, so because it's kind of true. I mean, it's not always true. I mean, COVID's a good example. It affected the world, not just the country, but more often than not, the stories, the great ones and the terrible ones, can sometimes literally be an individual or maybe a small group, compared to the 5 million of us that aren't involved with that story.
I just think always hearing from these, I guess if we call them outliers, always hearing from these people almost hardened my attitude towards like the majority of people that might have a complaint about, like, it's quite hard to get into the country. I'm like, but luxury, because you just get sick of hearing from people about it.
Yeah. All right. That conversation will on go, I'm sure. But we do have a guest coming on today in about 15 or 17 minutes. Actually, a local Dunedin story, but one that I'm pretty excited to share as well, because we like celebrating good things here on the show as well. And it's a local Dunedinite, Helen Willis, who has bought a company, and I'm interested in the company and what it's about and what she's doing. It's not a sponsored product for us or anything, although we're happily taking sponsorship. It's taken over a business that deals in edible straws, and I think that's an interesting conversation in and of itself. So we'll have her coming on in about 15 or 18 minutes. So we're sort of already running. We always do this. We're already running kind of up to the wire. So I want to jump over and have a talk about. Originally, I wanted to talk about Arise, and we talked a bit about this yesterday, and the views on Arise and what's happening there, especially because I'm someone who has been involved and am still involved in these circles on some level. Full disclosure, I've been messaging leadership from Arise over the weekend about, because I do this for a job and in the media, about getting someone on to have a chat with us about it from Arise, because I know people in there. It's not going to happen, obviously, and it hasn't happened, but complete full disclosure, it means I know people I don't know John Cameron personally, but I know people in these circles, and I have been involved in that world in a previous life for quite a long time. So I have a perspective on a lot of these things that maybe many don't have and don't understand. Although, let's just quickly go this, because actually what I want to do is move into this thing about people being treated badly at their place of work or whatever. And actually what I want to talk about is the allegations made about the Māngere Budgeting Services boss, because that was a story that broke yesterday as well. And I'm a little bit like, wow, if it's good enough for, TVNZ and TV3 and Webworms and stuff to be, selling the Arise story like it's a massive thing, it's appropriate that we also bring attention to other stories that may not be the same, but are on the same page of the book that we're reading as well. So it's not that I don't want to talk about this, because actually I've been speaking to Logan Church, who's the reporter for TVNZ, about this, and he's kind of said that he might come on this show later in the week. So we are going to talk about this, but just because of we don't have time constraints because of an interview coming up. Maybe we'll just touch on this briefly and then go to the second story today, which is in the same ballpark. And go from there. Anyway, do you actually, Chewy, I talked about this yesterday. I talked about my sort of knowledge and background and what I've seen happening in this world for forever. I mean, the idea of overworking people who work at a church, it's like, it's granted, that's that part. Now, I have to say as well, I was talking to David Farrier about this as well, seeing if he wanted to come on, and his allegations are, from his reporting, are about violence towards some of these interns, emotional and physical abuse at a Rice church. So I'm not saying, first of all, it's just about working people too hard. There are some further allegations to that, but it seems to me that TVNZ at the moment, although I know there is more to come from their reporting, I've been told that, is really just talking about the overworking of interns and stuff at the moment. I think that's what I'm reading in the TVNZ reporting. But Chewy, if you want to have a crack at that, because you didn't yesterday, you're more than welcome.
I just want to say one little thing to start with. How funny is it to have a guy called Logan Church?
I know. I almost wonder if that was done on purpose.
How good is that?
It was like Amy Park, that famous clip about Amy Park. Amy Park.
Look, I am on record as not being a big fan of these sort of mega churches and that sort of thing. I think they're purely a money-making venture. I think that there's huge issues with, I guess, secrecy around them as well, how they operate. They're very, very shut off. And I think when you get into a point of someone taking advantage in any way, whether that be of someone's time or labor or something even more serious than that, they're going to circle the wagons and protect themselves, protect their income and their money streams as much as possible. I think that brings in, these guys have come about because of the I guess the tax exemptions around being a religious organization.
Yeah,
what a fantastic way to make some money.
Well, look, and I think straight away churches should be paying tax. I think that's an absolute given. The original reason that churches were given these tax exemption was the work they did in the community. But I'm sorry,
back in
you go. The social welfare system is a thing that does that now. It's actually got nothing to do. It's not. There's nothing to do with the churches, but that was the original reason, was the idea of what they were doing in the community and what they were providing. You know, they were providing basically social welfare for their communities around them, so they got given tax exemption status. I think 100% churches should not be tax exempt. I think 100% churches should be paying tax, and I actually think that 100% people should not be getting a rebate on their donations to charities either. Like,
No,
if you
'cause,
charity, you get a third of it back or whatever it is. I don't think they should be doing that as well. I think all governments have talked about more tax and tax money and that kind of stuff. There's two areas immediately. It's called low-hanging fruit that they could do it. If you want to give $100 a month to World Vision, awesome. You shouldn't have to expect to get $33 of whatever it is of that back at the end of the year in your tax write-off. Just give the money to World Vision.
I mean, there must be a way to do it of like, okay, cool, religious organizations are no longer tax exempt. If you can show us the charitable works that you do that better the community, awesome. We'll give you a big tax refund for that. But yeah, when you see these churches, their production values, their equipment, their real estate, and that sort of thing, the way that their leaders live, you know, Arise is just one of them. Obviously, there's Destiny and all of those what is it, Pentecostal style churches. There's an enormous money funnel going on there.
Well, it's not necessarily the Pentecostal, because Pentecostal is a style of the way people do church. And typically Pentecostal, you think about loud guitars and that kind of stuff. It's the mega churches. There's a difference here. It's the mega churches you're talking about. City Impact Church on Auckland's North Shore, and as you say, Arise has become one, wasn't at the start. Destiny, you know, they're out there. They're out there, and I mean, I just don't think charities, full stop. And because unless they take religious organizations out, because it's like Sanitarium not paying tax on their profits because they're a religion and they make hundreds of millions of dollars a year selling fucking Weet-Bix. You know,
I mean,
they
these
should
are very
be paying tax, but it's said that for the work they do in the public, and the work that they do is spread the message of the religion, and that's not something that should be a tax.
No, absolutely not. And I mean, there's a very similar scandal that's been bubbling away about Hillsong over in Australia. The same sort of abuse of people. And yeah, you're not going to, they've got no benefit to being transparent about their processes. You know, this guy's quit and then he hasn't quit and then he's doing something else in the church and he's still part of the family. Oh, but we're we're looking at it, sort of thing. And it's like, well, you have no transparency. We don't know what's going on. And it's just that David Farrier seems to have blown the lid off the thing.
I mean, this is when it comes back to, it depends what's going on there a little bit, because to be honest with you, for people who are in the church world, especially people who are involved in this kind of church, the idea of, I mean, there are statistics out there, and I said this yesterday, as to, and look, we may not get to the Māngere budgeting one today because we've got a guest coming up shortly. That's fine. Or we may do it afterwards. There are stats out there about how long people who work in a youth role, like a leader in the youth pastoral role, they last like 2 or 3 years in these sorts of churches because they burn them out. You know, the same can be said about any kind of parachurch organization, and the tricky way they get around things like paying tax, like putting money onto a credit card rather than doing it as PAYE, because then they don't have to pay tax on it. I know of some parachurch organizations that'll say to you, and I'm making up the number of $60,000. They'll go, the salary is $60,000, but we're going to pay you $54,000 because we consider that 10% to be tithed back to us, and that's part of their contract. Or they tell you they're paying you less because they're a parachurch organization, and they're expecting some kickback from you because that's apparently what you have to do. So, I mean, look, I also think this idea around money, remember, there's two sides of this, right? The mega church organizations who are supposedly following someone who said it's easier for a rich man to get through the eye of a needle than it is for them to get into heaven. Right, that's a strange irony that no one's ever squared that circle. And I know if there are people listening or watching right now, if you start bringing up things like there was a gate in the walls of Jerusalem, which is what some people believe, is actually not true. That's false. It's a literal eye of a needle. And And the flip side to that is, the other thing is, there is a Bible verse that talks about, my dad owns a cattle on 1,000 hills, and what it's saying is the God that they serve has abundance of everything. There's nothing that you need to want for. Now, if there's nothing you need to want for, why the fuck do you pay people so much less than they do in the commercial sector? Surely, if there's nothing you need to want for, and there is money available for all of your needs, why isn't the philosophy, we'll pay people better than market rates rather than trying to get away with as little as possible? It just frustrates me completely. I mean, maybe there's some bitterness there from some previous experiences for me, and I'll be honest about that, but it just frustrates me.
I mean, there's also a world of difference between your local parish church and one of these guys. Very commercial, professional operations. I mean, you can't look around all of that stage equipment and lighting and AV gear and go, "Whoa, you guys must be hard up. You know, I'll take a lower wage because of it."
It was quite funny that me and two of my kids were watching Coachella over the weekend. We watched the Billie Eilish concert live because it was 6:30 New Zealand time, so we watched the whole hour 40 Billie Eilish concert. And then I was doing some news thing, and they had the things about Arise, and I'm like, you know, the difference between those stages is, I mean, it's different, but it's not that different. I mean, you can, yeah, it looks pretty good up there. It looks like, you know, I mean, and one of the questions I would always ask everybody, myself included, where I spend my money, is that $100 or $200 or $400,000 video setup system you've got. Let's just say it was a $400,000 setup. Let's just say, why wouldn't you get a $200,000 setup, which would still be fucking amazing, and put that $200K into some kind of community good? I mean, if you're going to put your money where your mouth was, you know what I mean? It's like, why? I mean, like, why would you buy that $300,000 vehicle when, you know, a $200,000 vehicle would still be unbelievable, and that $100K could go to something else? I mean, let alone a $40,000 vehicle. But you know what I'm saying? It's like, yep. I'm not even kind of advocating, you know, that everyone who's involved in this sort of world has to be a pauper and ride the bus and wear clothes from the op shop, but always the very best versus still having pretty fucking good resources and offsetting good works with the, it's a fascinating.
Doesn't sit right, does it?
It feels strange to me. But look, the story of there, and as I said yesterday, I'll always say alleged. Oh, the other thing I was going to say about money is, I really struggle when people within the church world, the charitable world, focus on the money. Like Jason is saying something, and it's completely fair, right? I'm not saying Jason is focusing on the money, about the tax-free status, because there's food banks, social community programs, etc., are run by churches. Add tax and remove a lot of these programs. The thing that I struggle with about that statement is, are we saying that these groups are basically saying, we won't do this if you tax us? We won't do our social good if you tax us? Or, like, when the minimum wage goes up and businesses have to figure out how to pay it, if there was tax there, would they figure out how to keep doing their food groups? And I think if they are who they say they are when it comes to their purpose in life, then they keep doing what they're doing, even if there's tax there. They don't go, oh, well, we can't do this anymore because, you know, we have to pay a fair amount.
There's a tax answer to that as well. Is like, we will tax you for your day-to-day operations, and you show us the figures of the social good that you do. How much do you spend on your food bank? How much do you spend clothing and looking after the poor? How much do you spend on social housing for your organization? Show us those numbers and you will get a tax rebate. That's how it works for pretty much everything else. It is a business. Treat it like a business. So, and I'm saying that from Arise and Destiny and all of your City Impact, those guys run it like a business. But I haven't seen an Arise food bank. I haven't seen a Destiny food bank. I haven't seen a City Impact. I have seen Salvation Army, as much as I've got criticisms around them. I have seen Presbyterian support. You know, those guys are doing the work. I think we're not criticizing religious organizations as a whole, but these guys are shining a light on themselves.
So what you're basically saying is, it's more means tested. Rather than going carte blanche, you have tax-free status. You're going, you can have tax-free status for the things that you can basically prove are benefiting the society.
Exactly, because at the moment, the tax-exempt status is making an assumption that yes, you do a lot of good work in the community.
And look,
that is not the same for every church.
Let's just be honest about the food banks here, because the conversation is going on in the chat about churches won't be being able to afford it. If a church runs a food bank, they run the food bank through volunteers and through food donated by the parishioners. Normally, I mean, I would think the most food banks would have come from donations. If they were paying tax on their other church stuff, where's the cost to the food bank? Volunteers who run it and donations given for food. What I mean, I can't see how all of a sudden paying 12% tax is gonna stop volunteers from volunteering and donors from donating food and stuff to the food bank.
And I mean, that when you look at tithing and that sort of thing, the original idea between tithing is because being a priest or a pastor or looking after your congregation was a job, and you needed a place to live, and the church needed maintaining, and tithing was supposed to cover that, and anything extra would go into the community. It's obviously very different now, but that certain style of church has made tithing into a business.
Look, I think that what we need to do right now is move on to our next conversation. We'll see at the top of the hour whether we come back and talk about Māngere budgeting services or not. If we don't, we'll certainly be talking about it tomorrow. But because it is such a pretty heavy conversation we've just been having, I kind of feel like it's unfair for us to bring Helen in talking about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a picture of my dog on the screen.
So
Nala.
sleepy.
Nala, hey. Might be dead. Wait, dog. Hey. Yeah, there you go. You're just helping us break through the two stories. Thank you, mate. So you just stay there, stay on your mat, and that'll help us. That's my tricky transition between two stories.
That's the palate cleanser.
Yeah, there's the palate cleanser. So speaking of palate cleansing, let's go have a chat with Helen Willis. Helen Willis is from Straw the Line, New Zealand. Helen, good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Hello, how are you?
Very well. Are you feeling okay?
Absolutely.
All right, good, mate. So yeah, sorry about that, because I saw you kind of in the waiting room, and I was wondering if you're going, oh crap, this is a bit of a heavy conversation for me to pull in. So we cleansed the palate with a golden border collie to try and bring you in.
Everybody likes a cute pet.
Yeah, there we go. Speaking of, look what she's doing right now. She's doing this thing where she pulls her legs up under her chest and the thing. Anyway, hey, I saw your story in the ODT, and I was really interested about having a chat with you about who you are, what you do, and why you're doing it. Your company is called, as it says in your image there, Straw the Line New Zealand, and it is a company that was started in Auckland by a couple of people. You've recently purchased it, and the company Straw the Line makes and sells edible drinking stores for the hospitality and retail industries. Tell us about it. Tell us about the company. Tell us about why you have purchased it and bought it to Dunedin.
Sure. So one we autocorrect there, which I did bring to the ODT's attention, is I don't make them. They're actually imported from Vietnam, the straws. Okay. Unfortunately, New Zealand isn't good at growing rice, something that we haven't mastered yet. So we can't grasp that skill yet.
Gotcha.
So they are imported, but who knows, the future, we might be clever enough to be able to do that. So yeah, April Fool's Day, took over the business from Auckland mums. Did have my fingers crossed till it hit 12 noon and kept thinking what's going to happen here. So Camilla and Charlotte, two Auckland mums, they did start it off, and they did really good success in getting it moving and starting, and were very passionate for a couple of years there. And so met the mums there in Auckland and brought it south to Dunedin, and yep, we're 20 days into the month, so had a week or so full week there, and then we've had a couple of short weeks with Easter in there.
Yep.
And same as them, on a mission to save the planet in New Zealand, one sloop at a time there, and just look after our planet and our future children there.
So this is about saving the planet. I mean, and I think we've all seen there's your Facebook page, and there's your, I guess, the logo that comes with it. We've all seen the images, I'm sure, of the straw being pulled out of the turtle's nose, etc., etc. What is it about edible straws that's going to help save the planet? Well, why?
Yep. So Great question. So the straw itself, if you can imagine pasta, so if you imagine pasta being balled up after a little bit of time, the ingredients are sort of similar to your pasta there. It's rice that's been grounded down to a flour, added a bit of tapioca, a little bit of salt and natural colourings, such things as beetroot to make the colouring, carrot, and a bit of black sesame seed there. That's how you get some of the colours there. So if it does go into our marine life there, then it doesn't matter if any of those marine animals have a wee nibble on it. It's not going to do any harm. It's just be nice and soft in there, just like if you were to boil up some pasta at home. After a period of time, that's if they even get to eat it, because probably after that long, it's probably disappeared there. 90 days in the ground, and that'll disappear altogether. It'll compost into next to nothing. I've had it in a cold drink at home here for about 8 hours. You can still drink out of the top of the straw, and it's nice and firm and hard.
Because that's one of the questions, one of the main questions, because I think many of us are driven wild by cardboard straws going soggy. So you say the same do that.
Yeah, so the top of it's still nice and firm, but the bottom of it definitely is starting to go a bit glowy like, but it still will certainly suck up nice and firmly and nice and strongly. And that's where you get that you can just have a wee nibble on the bottom of the straw if you choose to there.
Very good. Now this is I mean, I always struggle with these kinds of questions because obviously we don't want to know anything about your financials, but and this is a good profitable business. This is gonna make you good money as well as helping save the world.
Naturally, it's more of a premier product, but if you look in the supermarkets there, some of those cardboardy type of paper straws, they're getting up there in price. So we're only a few cents off the different prices on there. I don't know what their margins are, but we are a more premier product. I don't know how long the paper products are going to be around. Lots of people, you notice, have to grab the second one because they don't last their straw. It depends how long you're going to be drinking your drinks in a social setting. So for the consumer in those bars and clubs out there, I would probably suggest that you're going to probably go through one rice straw, maybe to every 2 or 1.5 paper straw. So I think it's probably going to be more beneficial to the retail, to the establishments out there in the hospitality industry.
No, I think it sounds like a great product. Yeah, I have an intense hatred of those paper straws. They never last, and definitely don't want to use a plastic one. So it's nice if this is going to be a product that I can get hold of. Very exciting.
Absolutely.
The story talked about you're doing drinking straws for the hospitality and retail industries, but as you've just said, supermarkets. So where do we get it from, and how much is this one of these packs? I mean, if we had been professionals, we would have got some before we talked to you, but we're not professionals. We're just dudes with microphones. How much are we looking at retail wise for one of these packs, and where do we get them from?
So it's throughout New Zealand. So they're available in scattering of retail stores. There's also some bars throughout Auckland, and they also stock them, as well as cafes that have them. So jump online, have a wee Google. Lots of them are proud to say where they have them. Recommended retail price of $11.99. You can also jump on the website and grab them. So recommended retail $11.99.
And how many in the pack?
25.
Okay.
Yep. So pack 25 there.
Yeah.
Yep. And I've got one here in front of me. So have a wee listen. Here's got a good wee snap to it.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So that's nice and hard there. Yep. Yeah. So that's nice and firm in your mouth.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, listen, we'll leave you to it, Helen. I know that you've come on today and you're struggling with a bit of a scratchy throat there, so we won't push it any further. But we'll be in touch because I want to give them a crack. I'm sure Chewy does too. So we'll find out where they're from and get some off you. And if we learn where we sell them in Dunedin, then we'll go and buy some, and then we can try them out and see what they're like. As we said, there's no sponsored product here. We're just like, I liked your story and I thought let's tell other people about it, and that's why we invited you on.
That's great. Really appreciate it.
All right. Hey, thanks for coming with us, and get well, rest up.
Yep. No, 5 more days.
Yeah. Okay. All the best with that. Thanks for coming on. You could hear the scratchiness in the throat. That was Helen Willis with Straw the Line. So if you find it for yourself, just look up Straw the Line. So Chewy, it's a couple of minutes to midday. Do you want to talk about what's happening with Māngere Budgeting Services? You got a few minutes. Should we do that? Or should
we can touch on this. Yeah,
because I'm kind of checking with what you're into. All right, so let's continue that conversation we were having from Arise. And when I say continue it, it's more going into the conversation about how people are treating those around them. Now, I'm not drawing a parallel between these two organizations, because ultimately they are both organizations, I think, and saying that it's the same, because I don't know all the details of either one of them. But we've been hearing about the Arise situation for since the end of last week, when probably it's fair to say Dave Farrier broke the story, and other media outlets have picked up on it since then. Just yesterday, I think it was, coming quite late in the day. It was early in the morning, so I was in the morning. There was a report coming out on RNZ that Māngere Budgeting Service Chief Executive Daryl Evans had resigned, and the board of the high-profile charity has appointed a Queen's Counsel to oversee an inquiry into allegations former staff have made against him. Again, a lot of allegeds in here, but I think the thing about Daryl Evans is everybody knows him. In fact, earlier in our broadcasts here, I'm just trying to think, it might have even been with you, Chewy, we were going to talk about something to do with, maybe it was actually the one we were talking about rents going up, and I phoned Māngere Budgeting Services because Daryl has been the go-to guy for many media outlets to talk about what's happening in the community, especially Māngere. And for people who don't know Māngere, if you're in Dunedin joining us, Māngere is a pretty, I'm going to say poor part of South Auckland. But then again, I guess most in the country, a poor part of South Auckland, their houses might only be worth $800,000 because it's Auckland. But lots of lower income, lots of beneficiaries, lots of solar parents, lots of new families. You know, there's an area of Māngere, there's one beside it called Māngere Bridge, which is a bit more affluent compared to, but it's seen as one of the lower socioeconomic areas within Auckland. So Māngere Budgeting Services is obviously seen as someone working with the most vulnerable, the people most at risk financially. So this story coming out is a shock to many. It's certainly a shock to me. I know people, Chewy. I know people.
You're getting little whispers, aren't you?
Well, it's more than little whispers. I know people who know people, and I know people who worked with and there, and I know people who know Daryl. And I'd never heard anything. I don't know him. I never heard anything. And I'm just going to go over to this page over here so no one can see my my sources. But I'll read something out to you that someone sent me yesterday when I realized that they were someone who knew of the situation. I have to be careful because some of the things that they've told me, they think will identify them to Daryl, and they don't want to be, because they say, quote, allegedly, the guy is nasty and might put 2 and 2 together. So I'm going to be careful as to what I reveal, because I don't want the person who's given me this information to have him go back to him. I don't know Daryl. All of this is allegedly. All of this is, I guess, hearsay technically. But in terms of general stuff, says my source, I know he had his husband and son working for the budgeting services, and I'm not sure how much they were paid, but I know that he owns several houses in New Zealand and overseas, and often goes on holidays, cruises, overseas trips. Now, the reason I want to bring that back into the Arise conversation is often places like Arise, places like Destiny Church, the leaders of those places get criticized for the amount of money and assets they have based on the vulnerable people they are working with. I don't begrudge anyone owning several houses. I'm not one of these people who is in the camp of you should only own 1 or 2 houses sort of thing. But if you are working in an industry that's with vulnerable people, if you run an organization that works with vulnerable people, and you're living that lifestyle allegedly of the rich and famous, you can ask questions. Let me also put this up. This is a Facebook post that I got sent to me. It's not by my contact, and I have actually hidden the name of the person so we don't see who it is. But this is someone who worked at the budgeting services who said on Facebook yesterday, finally, the people I heard loved my job then, and I could honestly say that I would still be there now if it wasn't for this prick. The board paid me out a goodwill gesture to keep my mouth shut. As a, what do we call us? Are we a media conglomerate? Whatever we are, I always want to be fair, which is why when the government deserves criticism, we give criticism. When the opposition, needs to be pointed out for playing the game, we need to point it out. If we're going to point the finger at churches and stuff for their status and some of the leaders within that group of, financially being questionable and how they're treating their staff, then it's more than appropriate that we point this out. In fact, it's interesting now to ask the question, and this is not whataboutism, because I'm all about exposing both aspects. But when we were looking through the TVNZ and TV3 website, did you see anything about Māngere budgeting services on either of those pages? Because I did not.
No.
So they're exposing and talking about other things, and they're doing a lot on Arise at the moment. This seems to be a pretty massive, similar type story, yet no one seems to be talking about it in any great way. Just an observation. Chewy.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody involved in a charity, this doesn't sound good, does it? But yeah, anyone that's offering budget advice, that sort of thing, you'd hope that the majority of the money that they had available was going into that. I'd be wary of anything that had a CEO with a big house on a hill, overseas trips, relatives working for the organization as well. There's a lot of red flags there.
I'm always, and I'm going to sound a bit like a hypocrite now, I'm always a little bit, I just wanted to make sure we were talking about the right thing here when we talk about charitables. So I looked it up as you were talking. So this is mangarebudgeting.org.nz, an incorporated society registered under the Charitable Act. So it's 1957, established more than 20 years ago. So it's a charity. So just to make sure that we're both talking about charities. I remember doing, not me myself, but being behind the scenes, an interview with Brian Tamaki. And he came into this conversation at a radio station, and he got challenged, about his money and his wealth and stuff. And his response, now, I don't actually believe his response now that I've done the research, but his response at the time was, I made all my money before I started Destiny Church. Now, if that was true, and I'm not, don't pull the face, because I'm not defending him. I'm saying if someone made it like if Bill Gates started a church and lived in a mansion on a hill, you wouldn't begrudge him, would you?
No.
So
no,
exactly.
I think that's a fair comment. Yeah.
So the one thing I would want to know about this and the comment about houses, international trips, is were his parents multi-millionaires worth hundreds of millions, and did he get a massive inheritance? So it's not quite a done deal. If you work for a charity and you're wealthy, that's a
that's a really good point.
If you work for a charity and you've made your money to make and buy the assets while working for the charity, I think that's questionable. But we just have to get that bit of information first before we can unequivocally make that determination. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair. He could have made his money in business and gone, hey, now it's my time to return something back to the community. All credit to him. I guess you see stuff like this large and small right throughout the country, though. You see people in clubs and charities and churches and various organizations with their hands in the tills or straight up nepotism and that sort of thing. And I think, if it's something as influential as this group is, it's going to be really interesting to see what the outcome is here. If he's got the means, you might see him just bolt.
Do you know what's interesting as well? Just a complete side note, and I'm sure as soon as I say this, people might point to someone like Alan, but because as I'm about to ask it, I also answer my own question in my head. So often these accusations about, and no one has used this term yet, But when we think about sort of narcissistic type personalities and people who are authoritarian and that kind of stuff, they're men. You don't often hear these sorts of, like, if you're back to the church now, if you hear about things like sexual offending or that kind of stuff, they're men. I mean, as I said, I answered my own question when I said Alan in the back of my head as I was thinking it, but still, when you think about your typical offender in an area of narcissism or business bullying or or inappropriate action or whatever, so often I would be willing to say, without having done the research yet, the majority of the time it's men. I wonder why that is. I'm pretty confident saying that's accurate. I wonder why that is.
I mean, there was always conversations about, it's all men in leadership positions because they've got the type of personality to get there. Really just made it very, very toxic. Made it sound like the only way that you'll get to a leadership position is crawling over the bodies of the people that you knocked off on the way. But yeah, I guess when, like we were talking about the church, if you believe in yourself that much, then there's nothing that you can't explain away, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to take this because
the article on Webworm from David Farrier about Arise, and again, all allegedly, talks about how John Cameron has a anger issue, but a lot of people just let it pass because they consider it righteous anger, because of course he's a godly man. So, I mean, again, I don't know if that's true or not true. One person's reporting, based on, but I can speak from experience. There is a lot. Some of the things I've seen happen in a workplace, a parachurch workplace. I've said it for a long time. I have to be careful because I do know people who work in some of these areas who are the best people, who run the best places, who look after people in the best possible way. But other ones, and I would say the majority of ones I've had dealings with, treat people far worse than a normal quote unquote normal workplace. And part of the reason is they don't, on some level, feel accountable. I was escorted from a radio station that worked for a trust, which was the Rima Group, by the police because I wasn't wearing shoes in a studio. So they escorted me from the building. The police escorted me from the building. So,
wow.
Yeah, I've been there, and at the same time, I was doing some work, like for my own company for News Talk ZB, where the biggest host in the country was Paul Holmes and his producer Grumpy would both be in their studio with their shoes off. But at the Rima Group, being in a studio away from the public that no one could see me, I took off my sandals, actually like I am right now. I don't know if I can get my fat feet up there, Philip. Oh, bare feet. There you go. Fuck me, just like this. kick my sandals off, put them under the desk while I was broadcasting, and a boss came down and told me that they'd changed the rule that men were not allowed to wear open-toed shoes, and I had to leave the building. And I said to him in a much more appropriate way at the time to fuck off. Didn't say fuck off, and told him I'd come to talk to him after the show because it was a fundraising day. To which he refused, and the police were called. And the police were like, I don't know why we're here, but I mean, if they're asking you to leave, you should probably leave. And so I left I left the building from a parachurch organization in the most important day of the year, because some little Hitler changed the rules because he wanted people to be wearing their shoes when they were in the studio. No one could see them outside the public eye. So I've been there, and I actually went back to that group and did some more work for them, and saw worse and more intimidating and aggressive leadership, 10 years later, 8 years later. So I'm speaking from experience of seeing this culture. But I also have to say I've never seen the culture of moving into that kind of physical abuse or sexual abuse that some allegations are made from some churches. But I have seen the overworking. I have seen the treating people like shit. I've seen all of that stuff, and I've seen it constantly.
Yeah.
Because because they treat it like it's a church, and in a church, the person at the top, the pastor or the priest, is sort of unquestionable. So if management makes a decision and it's wrong, it doesn't matter. It's unquestionable because they don't, even though they operate it like a business. So the Rema Group, all their websites are .co.nz. That's a company.
Yeah.
So they run it like a business, but they treat their leadership like their priests and pastors, and they're unquestionable. And that's part of the problem.
Yeah. Kind of unrelated, but you did remind me of a very funny story from when I worked at a radio station that will remain nameless. I was walking down to do a Sunday show and got caught in an absolute downpour. Was completely soaked to the skin. I was doing a Sunday night request show, nobody else in the building. So I took my clothes off so I could dry them out. And then somebody came in and just saw me standing behind the desk, topless, just in my underpants doing the show. And that was an interesting chat come Monday.
My goodness.
Do you do the request show nude, Chewy?
You should just say yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So I like to be free to express myself, with everything hanging out there. So anyway,
but yes, I wasn't escorted from the business for that.
I've experienced it. I've seen it, and I've heard stories. I know a lot about that culture. Like I said, some groups in New Zealand that work with families and stuff, that's their MO, but they're also completely homophobic. And I've seen it, and I've seen people. I know of people that have been given books about not being gay when they're gay working for these groups. I've seen other people run out of those establishments for who are gay. It's not.
I saw the Salvation Army deny someone a food parcel because of their lifestyle.
Yeah. I think the thing about me sharing my thoughts around that and being critical is because actually when you look at those teachings of that original guy they're following, old JC, it's look after the widows, look after the orphans, treat everybody well. The actual message, the teachings of that thing are unquestionable. You just can't, because he never said, gay people are bad. You just if you actually, there's a guy called Tony Campolo. I'm getting into my thing. I'll finish here, I promise. There's a guy called Tony Campolo who was a evangelical Christian in America, right? And he eventually became like a devil of the day because he supported LGBT rights, and that's what happens if you then move into supporting them. You become, yesterday's news, and you're evil. He was talking to this person once, and this person said to him, if you look up Tony Campolo, gay son online, you'll find the story. He was talking to this mum, and his mum said to him, when we die, do we all get judged at the same time, or do we get judged as soon as we die? That's the heaven-hell conversation. Mm-hmm. And Tony Campolo goes into the story, and he tells the story, and he goes, look, it's a long-winded story theologically, but he said we all get judged at the same time. And he said, why? And she said, because my son was gay, and he just committed suicide, and I want to be able to stand beside him and say he was a good boy. So she wanted to be able to advocate in this world of after death being judged. And Tony goes on to tell the story, and then he ends of it by saying, you'll have heard this, Chewy, because that's a common parlance now, but also within the church, which is this idea of you hate the sin, but not the sinner. In other words, you think about it from a parenting point of view. You don't like the action that your kids are taking, but you always love your kids. And this is a common thought. Ironically, Gandhi said that. It's not a biblical teaching at all. But this is a very common thought within the church. Tony Campolo goes on to say, actually, the teachings of that man I was just talking about, old JC back in the day, are the opposite of that. Well, the teachings of this guy are you hate your own shit, you hate your own sin, you hate your own shit, right? And when you've got all of that 100% sorted out, you then kind of have the right to comment on someone else's. And when you think about that as a lifestyle, worrying about my own failings and getting my own failings sorted out and just loving other people, that changes the whole dynamic of what these people within these buildings that are called churches should be doing. You sort out all your failings when you're perfect, you can come and comment on mine. But until that point, worry about your own failings and love me. That is the kind of religion that I would adhere to. I'm on board. I'm on board for that.
I don't have any criticisms of something like that.
But exactly.
But you don't get money and power that way. You can't point to someone and go, they're the wrong ones. We're the right ones.
Yeah. So
and
anyway.
that's where it all gets wobbly, doesn't it?
Yeah. Try to go on a bit of a rant. I've had a couple of days of rants, actually. You bring up the rant in me, Chewy.
That's excellent.
Oh,
that's
no, look at this.
People pay their ticket price for.
I've lost someone.
Where's the dog? Where's the dog gone?
He's out there licking some part of your body that if we could do, we probably would as well. Anyway, hey, thanks for today. Today's been interesting. We didn't get to this. We didn't get to the story about Mr. What's his face? Info.
The frogs are gay.
Yeah, the frogs are turning the frogs gay. We might pick up on that tomorrow. And other than that, yeah, cheers for joining us. It's been fun. We'll probably catch you next week. Yeah, Chewy?
Yeah, absolutely.
And other than that, we will continue to bring you big hairy news. I was thinking yesterday when you had the cap on. Yeah. When you had the cap on yesterday, we kind of looked like before and after shots from having a good shave.
There may have been comments in my household
before and after. I think I'm the before and you were the after. So I thought that was quite good, actually. That's quite a good look. Matches with all our branding. Okay, so thanks for joining us today. Follow. Oh, should we put our little things up there, Chewy? I should have done this all the way through, shouldn't I? Where are our ones? There. Look, you're the only one that's got one of these as well, Chewy, from when we did this last year when we were setting it up.
Nice.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. It's been a good day. Tomorrow, we probably are going to be talking some more. I'll tell you one of the things I want to talk about tomorrow, and that is, has New Zealand done atrociously under Omicron? Now, I asked that question for one main reason. At one stage, we were about 190th in the world for our case numbers. We are now 69th in the world. Our population is about 130th in the world. Now, to go from 190th to 70th, I want to know why, because the rest of the world has also had Omicron, BA1 and BA2, and I would have thought that if we had have stayed where we were, then it would have been proportional. You know, all the other countries proportionally would have been a similar response. Now, that says to me that Omicron has hit New Zealand maybe worse than any country in the world proportionally, because we're now 70th in the world for our numbers, even though we're 120th-ish country, and we were 190th. So something's happened. Is that a government failing? Is that circumstantial? Why is it? Is it because we lived for 18 months without COVID and we all got blasé about it and didn't care? But something has happened to turn us into a country with Omicron that is performing terribly compared to many countries in the world. And I want to kind of investigate what that is. I've approached a couple of epidemiologists to come on and talk about it. They may not want to, because it's kind of going, why have we been shithouse at this? Just purely with the numbers. I mean, we still have to look at our survivability rate and be pretty excited about that, but just the infection rate. So we'll chase that over the next couple of days, as well as a bunch of other stuff as well. But anyway, Chewy, my friend, thank you, sir, for jumping in, and we will be back again tomorrow morning from 11 a.m. and Chewy will probably catch you next week.
Awesome.